Thank you so much, Sigurvin, for inviting us for this very positively contributing conference. I think it's very important to conduct dialogue. That is the essence of living together in the society. My name is Muhammed Emin Kizilkaya. I am born in Denmark. I consider myself as Dane, as I grew up with trolls and you know, the ferries and so on. And that was something that my mom would always, you know, introduce me when I went to the library. But I have Kurdish roots, like my wife. My grandparents came to Denmark. Actually, my grandfather came to Denmark in 1969. He was only 17 years old. So that's many years ago. So some people consider us as third generation immigrants. I don't know, maybe my daughter is fourth generation and the son of or daughter of my daughter gonna be fifth generation. I don't know how long this goes, but we consider ourselves as Danes. We speak Danish at home. I sing Danish lullabies to my daughter when she goes to sleep, and so does my wife. So that's a little bit about myself. I am in my PhD studies right now, and I would like to do it less complicated for you. My main curiosity is really to understand identity formation among young refugees in the Western world. Here we are emphasizing on Iceland. How is it that they are forming their identity? What is the navigation they go through? And it must be very difficult. As you might imagine, at home you're watching Al Jazeera, Arabic television, and speak Arabic, and you have a certain culture and certain religion that you're practicing there, and then you go back in school and there you have some other values. And so I'm very curious to understand the hybridity, the hybrid formation, hybrid identity that these young people might form, and we have already seen some preliminary findings that actually prove that. The title of my research is called Transcultural Journeys, Unveiling Hybrid Identities and Superdiversity among young quota refugees in Iceland. And I am a part of a larger research team called ESRCI. We consist of several academics who are commonly emphasizing on critically approaching their social inclusion among young refugees in Iceland. Am I at about that? Yeah, okay. Before we move on, I'm gonna have a small session together. Yeah, something that I made up in the car on the way, so it's not something I've been preparing for long, but I thought it would be a very good idea. What we're gonna do now is that we're gonna create some imagination in our minds. I want you to imagine that you are walking on Reykjavik streets. It's evening. Are you all imagining? It's evening and you're walking on Reykjavik street. And while you're walking, you see a young man or woman, it's up to your imagination, sitting on a bench by him or herself, looking either straight or looking down on his or her phone. And you wonder, where is this person from? And then you try to create some assumptions. Maybe the person is Arabic. Maybe the person is Muslim. Maybe the person came here alone. Maybe the person is working. Maybe the person is unemployed. Maybe the person has his or her family here. So create that imagination, because we're going to use that and put it in our pocket so we can go further into my research. I will give you 30 seconds to create your own imagination. 30 seconds. Imagine this, and then we'll move on. All right, so I assume that each one of us have created our own kind of picture of that person, our own description of that person. Let's move on. So the aim of my research is, or we can just go directly, or before I actually go into the slide, I will just introduce my research very shortly, and then I'm going to go into the very boring part of the PowerPoint, which is the methods. I'm not going to go too much into that, and then I'm going to go into the preliminary findings, and that's when we're going to use our imagination. Right? So the aim of my research is to explore how young refugees in Iceland navigate hybridizing identities through cultural, linguistic, and virtual interactions. I'm also trying to examine how cultural heritage and Icelandic norms shape young refugees' belonging, adaptation, and resilience. So adaptation and resilience plays a core element in my research. And furthermore, I'm trying to analyze how interactions in social, cultural, and digital spaces influence refugee youth's sense of identity and emotional well-being. So this is my core area of my research, really to try to understand how are they adapting to the Icelandic society. There are very limited research on the adaptation processes and identity navigation that these young people are exploring. By doing that, by critically approaching these aspects, we also provide some guidelines for institutions in Iceland of how to see and look and understand these young people. So the context is following. I'm trying to understand how they're navigating hybridizing identities. So as you might imagine, it can be very difficult for a young refugee to navigate yourself in the Icelandic society or in any societies. And this is not a matter of being a refugee, this is a matter of being an immigrant. So wherever you go in the world, the matter of immigration is always complex. So young people, they have a certain lifestyle, a certain culture at home. They have some expectations. And when they travel from home to school, then they approach other expectations. So the parents might have some expectations on these young people, that you have to be this and that. But when they go into school, the teachers might have some other expectations. So as you might see, it is extremely complex for young people who came to a new country, who speak several languages and has to learn a new language. You can imagine how difficult it is to navigate. And that's why we also have problems, because some of those youngsters, they end up in situations where they cannot find solution. So they decide to choose extreme lifestyle. So when you cannot form this hybrid identity, if you don't know how to navigate yourself in a multi-layered society, then there's a tendency of choosing extreme. That is either by joining gangs or extreme radical Muslim groups. I don't see difference between them. We are both devoted into religion. I don't see difference between gangs and extreme radical groups. They're the same kind of extremism that they're promoted. So I implement the concept of super diversity, and that is a concept that was presented by Stephen Vesovich in 2007. And Vesovich argues that diversity is beyond diversity. We live in a society where it's not only about ethnicity and race and nation, it's more than that. It is values, it's equality, it's social classes. And for me to understand the living and the navigation of identities among young people, I'm trying to implement super diversity as an analytical tool to understand the different kind of exposure that they are going through. And then I'm actually presenting a new concept that is called hyperdiversity. It is very controversial, I would say, because it tends to oppose the concept of super diversity. Hyperdiversity says, well, diversity is intensifying. When you are going into social media, you can go from A to Z in a split second. The social media presents hyperdiversity. It is hyper. It's constantly intensified in diversity, in transculturalism, etc. So hyperdiversity, superdiversity are my analytical tools in my research. And I'm using language portraits, which is an anatomy of a body where youngsters are drawing where they feel on the part of the body, which language they feel that on the different part of the bodies. And then I'm also using value card activities, which I'm going to talk a little bit further on later on. So superdiversity explains the complexity of migration-driven diversity, while hyperdiversity helps us to understand intensified diversity within the virtual world. In my research proposal, I am explaining that these youngsters, young refugees, they are belonging to the Gen Z, the Generation Z, that are the generation who grew up with the social media. So if we as researchers want to understand young people within the age of, which is my target, the age of 13 to 22, we have to imply the social media. We cannot get a full conceptualize the living of young refugees without including the virtual world. And furthermore, hybridity or hybrid identity was firstly presented by Baba in 1994, and that is that people who are identities is fluid, and young people or people who are navigating through multi-layered cultures, they tend to develop this hybrid identity, knowing how to act, knowing which identity that you're pulling out in different social settings. And then transculturality, it's actually a very easy concept to understand. It says, it was presented by Welsh in 1999, cultures overlap and blend. They are not fixed, but they're fluid. For example, when we go in Laugavegur and you go to a shop or a restaurant, let's say you want to eat sushi, then you go from the Icelandic context, and as soon you enter this restaurant, it becomes, you get a sense of Japan. You know, the decorations, the cultural paintings and so on, if it's a very traditional restaurant. This is what Welsh argues as being transcultural, that cultures are constantly overlapping. It is not something that we can prevent. It has happened throughout history, and it will happen even more and even more intensifying with the globalized tendencies that we are currently experiencing. And then multidimensional belonging, Johansen and Porølia, it's a Scandinavian study. They argue that belonging is emotionally experienced. It is shaped by relationships, social settings, and personal meaning, and exists across both social and digital spaces. In our preliminary findings, we've seen that youngsters have multiple belongings. They feel like they belong in Iraq because they have the social media, but at the same time, they belong here. So belonging is not something that necessarily comes out from physical belonging, but it is an emotion, it's a feeling of something, that you belong to something. And that's extremely important to use when we want to understand the complex lives that young refugees are undergoing. I hope I'm not too boring, am I? I'm going to go very short into the methodology. We are using a mixed qualitative method. We have been traveling in 11 different municipalities, Ísafjörður up in the north, east, not east actually, it's one of the few areas we haven't traveled, but north, west, and south of Iceland. We so far have conducted 120 interviews. It is a very big research that has been funded by Ranis. We are 3 PhD students, 1 postdoc, and several professors, run by Hanna Ragnarsdóttir, which you might know about. And we are emphasizing on youngsters aged 13 to 22 who came to Iceland after 2018, so we can get a glimpse on the first socialization processes that they are undergoing of all genders. So it's from after 15, from 15 to 19, families were resettled via the UN resettlement program from 2015 and 19. So we are emphasizing on quota refugees. And what we have found in our preliminary findings, which is very interesting, and we just recently started, so there's a lot of data that we're still working on. We found out that hybrid identities develop as youth balance cultural heritage and Icelandic norms. So they learn to adapt Icelandic norms, but they also learn to adapt their Arabic norms. So they know how to be in school, in Icelandic schools, and they also know how to, the different social settings that they have at home. That's also something that me and my wife have. We speak 5-6 languages, and we've also had this, we know exactly how to act in different social settings. We also came to the conclusion in our preliminary findings that social media fosters cultural connections and transcultural communication, both with friends and families across border. And then we have something about online gaming, which plays a huge role among young people because they tend to engage in multilingual interactions. So young refugees speak English on gaming, they speak Icelandic, and they also use Arabic and so on. They are literally juggling with many languages at the same time. And this is very interesting. Tradition and adaptation vary. Some families embrace new customs. So we have had some families from Syria who said that, well, in our house we are celebrating 2 celebrations. We celebrate Christmas and we celebrate Eid. Do we know what Eid is? which is very interesting. And these families are devoted Muslims, but it is a tradition. It is a way of maintaining cultural practices while adapting to the new cultural practices that they have in Iceland. So these are, of course, a very positive outcome that we have seen. However, what we have as a huge issue right now are the schools. We have lack of guidelines. We've seen it also, and today, and what's happening, unfortunately, in certain area of Reykjavik, there are lack of guidelines. We don't know how to approach the teachers of those, the parents of those young people. We don't know how to approach the youngsters. We don't have any guidelines. So we have seen that school adaptation is a challenge. There's language barrier. There are lot of reliance on mediators for communication between parents and teachers. So this is why we come out with this research. We want to be critically approach the topic of inclusion. Each of us have different approaches. We have 3 different PhD students working on it. Mine is merely on social networking and identity formation. And by conducting this research, we hope to create these guidelines. Lastly, religious and cultural misconceptions often place youth in a position where they must explain or justify their beliefs and customs to Icelandic peers. Hilal has explained it very clearly. I've also had it, and there's always this constantly of having to explain about yourself. Well, we were on a radio in Byljan yesterday, and we're talking about dialogue, and the news anchor, he asked me, well, you're talking about dialogue, but what's happening in Iran? And I'm like, first of all, I'm not Persian. I've never lived in Iran in my life before. Last time I went to Turkey was 2016. That's roughly 8 years ago. Yeah, but can you explain about Iran? Why am I going to explain about Iran? We came here to talk about dialogue. Yeah, but people want to know about it. Yes, sure. But you're asking the wrong person. Maybe you should go and find some books about, the politics in Iran. And by the way, politics and religion doesn't mix well. That's the one I want to say. So that's actually what I said as an answer. I said, politics and religion, they don't mix well. Because it becomes, you use religion as an egocentralized way of promoting your own beliefs and thoughts, or justifying your own beliefs and thoughts. And then I said, right now we're focusing on dialogue in Iceland, not in Iran. I am not in Iran right now. So that's what we have. They always or often have to justify their beliefs, which creates segregation, unfortunately. So I already went through these aspects of implication discussion. This is one of the language portrayings that we have been doing. We are asking the youngsters to draw where they feel like they're part of the body, which language they feel that belongs to the body. This is an elder young person who put Arabic here around the middle section of the body. Icelandic is here because you have to think with Icelandic. And then legs. Danish is down the leg. It's so unnecessary with Danish that they put them down to the legs. And French, that's something we don't use that much, so it's down here. But we have this switch between Arabic either be around the chest area or around the head. Our preliminary findings show so far that those who grew up here, who came here at 6 years old, they tend to put Icelandic here. And Arabic is somewhere here on the hands or on the leg. Whereas those who came as older teenagers, they still have Arabic here around the heart. So if I would be drawing this, I would not put Kurdish here personally. I'm put Danish here. I am Dane, even though I have dark beard and very hairy arms and dark hair. I am identity-based. I'm Dane. So time is running out. Dialogue is extremely important. We are working on dialogue. I am not much for providing academic presentations. I like to provide more kind of like dialogue-based presentation, but I understood that this was a very important aspect that the host wanted me to explain. So there you have it. But I want to end up saying we should work, and we have a lot of work to do. We see segregation happening. We see hate blooming up because of misconception. I don't believe in hate. I don't. I simply don't believe in hate. I think hate is lack of knowledge. So when you were imagining that young person, did you imagine that the person went through all this process? Or did you have a simplistic imagination compared to what I just presented? From that, we have to question ourselves, how much do we know about young people or immigrants or Muslims? One of my good friends, Christian, he is a very devoted Christian, and we talk about religion. He talks about Jesus, and I love talking about Jesus because Jesus plays a huge role in Islam too. We have to learn we don't have to agree, and not agreeing is not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because then we can learn from each other. But we have to look and understand the point of each one of us have from a positive aspect. We can disagree, but we can talk. That's the most important thing. That's how dialogue works. So we in Fellow Horizon, there's 2 other members here. We've been working hardly since 2014, and interestingly, media never talks about us because media like to talk about the bad things that's happening. We established Pangia Stærðfræðikeppni, which is the largest math competition in Icelandic history. It is refugees and young Muslims who established that here in Iceland. And we tried to get some PR from the Icelandic media, but they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about the Rannis budget that we have gotten, working on Scandinavian identity among young people here. So that's why I'm so thankful to know Pastor Sigurðin Lárus Jónsson for the contribution that he's doing. It's so important. I'm so happy being here. I'm so proud of having my wife here as well, and we are both babysitting and talking, attending a conference. So if you want to change the world, what does Michael Jackson say, even though that I'm not a fan of him, I don't like him that much, to be honest, but he says something very beautifully. Look at the man in the mirror. So if you want to change the world, we have to change the world from our aspect, because it is like COVID-19. When we change, when we smile, it's going to spread. That's how Jesus taught us, Abraham taught us, Muhammad taught us, Solomon taught us, Adam taught us, Moses taught us, Noah taught us. It was all about kindness. So thank you so much. Thank you, Sigurðin, for inviting both me and my wife here. And thank you all for coming. And I'm just going to end up here. I hope I haven't surpassed the time too much. Thank you so much.